One of the things I'll often hear from somebody going through a major change is a sense that it feels like jumping off a cliff. Or if we want to go back to one of our usual leadership tropes that we'll use, is it does have that burn the ship moment of no going back. And that's what I want to spend a little bit of time on today. I think there's some reframing we can do with that to know that change is still going to have its ups and downs, but it doesn't have to feel nearly as scary as jumping off a cliff. If we think about the concept of jumping off a cliff, what comes up? Well, there's a sense of being in freefall. There's a sense of having lost control. There is danger to it. There is perhaps an impulsiveness to it. And I think what we want to do, rather than be in freefall and jump off that cliff, is start to build the switchbacks for ourselves, starting to find our way to get there without such a dramatic way of getting there. The other piece I think is really around when we talk about those burn the ship moments is a sense of no going back. And I challenge that issue as well. I think when we're in a corporate role and we are really used to and familiar with the salary we have, with the title we have, any changes in that can feel really quite disruptive. Our brains are wired for safety. Our brains prefer the status quo. And so we have to find our way to help make that a little bit of a safer transition, help get through that in a way that allows us to feel more comfortable. And any big change should really represent a process over time. It is rarely going to be that you impulsively quit your job or that you just one day out of the blue decide that you're going to ask your partner for a divorce. These are usually after we've worked our way through some process. And there are other things we can do to make sure that we start creating those switchbacks and even some safety nets. If we're thinking about leaving our role in a particular organization, we're going to want to run the numbers and understand what financial runway we need, how long we think we might go without income, and make sure that we've got the offsets to be able to manage that period in between of leaving that regular paycheck, but not yet having all of those contract revenues come in. Some people will start with some soft contracts, either some good notional agreements of contracts that'll start once you've left. Some will do a few small contracts as a side hustle. And more, they're building that bridge, building that scaffolding across the canyon so that, in fact, you don't have to jump off the cliff. You can make your way steadily across to the other side. It's being able to understand your risks and be able to mitigate them. If you're thinking of leaving a long-term relationship where there are shared assets or custody issues potentially, it's worth it to get some legal advice. It is worth it to draw on the expertise of others, once again, to understand what might need to be secured, what might need to be documented ahead of time, what might need to be laid out and planned for as a strategy before motions and heated battles might start. And this doesn't mean you're going to go all the way through and line everything up and drop it on somebody else at the last minute. But it's all about your change process, all about understanding what needs to be there to make this feel less like it's out of control, less like a free fall. And while all of those logical, analytical pieces are great, understanding and running your numbers and getting some legal advice, I think the area where people struggle the most and where we often end up focusing most of our time is on that emotional roller coaster. I know for me, it was a period over many, many months. It was close to a year in deciding to leave my role and my last day worked. And in those first 4 months, it felt like a concept more than a reality. There were days when I was excited about it. There were days when I was second-guessing myself and doubting it. But I continued on, and it took time for my brain to really process the idea that I would be leaving. There is the emotional roller coaster. In any change that happens, good or bad, there will always be some degree of grief. There will always be changes of letting go of comfortable routines, letting go of perhaps a sense of belonging where we were. It is no longer seeing the people that we work with every day. And that gets even more profound if we're talking about the end of a long-term relationship. It asks us to redefine our identity, who we are outside of a title, who we are outside of a relationship. And that won't happen overnight. We need to invest the time to allow those processes to happen. And I think where we can shortcut ourselves is, unfortunately, as men, we're often socialized to push away our feelings, to distract ourselves, to numb them. And I think the more that we're able to have some of that learning and the skill building associated with understanding our emotions, understanding the reasons for our emotions, the more we can flow with them, the more that we can navigate that stormy journey. We have to understand that there will be some anxiety because something meaningful for us is starting to change, and there are some risks in that. We may feel sadness because we will be losing what is familiar to us. We will be having to enter into different spaces. We will have to accept that where we are today doesn't get to stay as it is, and we have to move into a new space. And while that may be a great positive new space in the end, we'll still miss parts of where we are today. So rather than fighting those emotions or trying to push them away, it's simply giving them the space to be there and understanding why they're there, understanding our profound biological wiring and the purpose of emotions. More than a nuisance, they're really meant to help us cope across different changes, help us be able to make sense of things that were once one way and are now another way. And it's not always just a paper-based logical exercise that we move from X to Y. There is a whole psychological process that has to go alongside with it. So give yourself that time. And the more that you can understand and work through that time, the more some of the smaller details work themselves out. I think if we think about the burning the ships analogy, some of the fear is also a sense of closing a door that you can never come back to. And while there may be some truth to that, I also am cautious about too black and white thinking. If you're like me and maybe have a little bit of a predilection at times for some catastrophic thinking, in my mind it was either I was successful after leaving my role, or somehow I would not be able to pay my mortgage, have to sell my car, and end up homeless. And what we forget is all those shades in between. My first choice might not have been to go and find a job in another organization, but it was a possibility. So while I was leaving a role, it didn't mean that I was leaving behind the experience that I gained, the wisdom that I gained, all of the skills, all of the leadership acumen that I had built over years, and that was still fully transferable. My ideal was to transfer that to my own business, and I was fortunately able to do that. But if I hadn't been, there were still options, and so it wasn't a burn the ship moment. It wasn't there was no going back. We will always bring ourselves with us wherever we go, and we will bring our experience, our wisdom, our knowledge, our sense of self, and the growing sense of self that we have. The reason that so many big changes come in midlife, and why they're often large and disruptive, is we're hitting that point where so much of the external stuff isn't what's giving us value anymore. We may have the title, we may have the salary, we may have all those external achievements of where we live and other aspects of perhaps that society admires or tells us who we should be. But around middle age is when that sense of self really crystallizes, and we start having a clearer sense of what is important for us, what is meaningful for us, what it means to stand in our truth. And the more that we do that, the more we realize sometimes that we do need to make big, important changes that better align us with a truer version of ourselves. And that can feel scary. Some folks never get there because it does feel too much like jumping off a cliff. It does feel too extreme, too scary, too big to contemplate. They haven't built those switchbacks for themselves. And I would also say, unfortunately, those who stay trapped in that mentality, become more and more disengaged, become more and more jaded and bitter, and they're the ones that show up with more regret as life goes on. These are challenging changes to make, but these are the ones that 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you'll be so happy that you made. You will feel more infinitely yourself. You will have the energy, the grounded confidence, the clarity. You will be doing what you love and having less things in your life that sap your energy. And I think another important piece to really focus on in this journey is that the middle is messy. Making these decisions, riding that roller coaster of emotions, living with the uncertainty, working through the fear, the sadness, the sense of panic at times, and the second guessing and the veiled hope are all part of that journey. But don't let the discomfort of going through that journey sway you from the knowingness that you have that you still made the right decision. Sometimes the messy journey can get in the way of us remember that the outcome isn't the wrong outcome. We can mistake the discomfort of the middle part for making the wrong decision, when in fact, it simply means that it is a process of evolving. And sometimes it is our own evolving, and sometimes it is the evolving of others. Sometimes we may make a decision that doesn't land well with somebody else, but they need some time to understand it. They need some time to process it. And that doesn't make it the wrong decision for us. So what are those switchbacks for you? If you know where you want to go, what are the steps that you need to take in between? What are you worried about in that? And give yourself time to figure out some middle steps, figure out some scaffolding. And that could take a day or that could take a month. But as long as you have a sense of that momentum going forward, it usually reaches a point when there is a point of no return. For me, there was that day when I knew without a shadow of a doubt that my time there was going to wrap up and it was time to move into my own place. It was time to step away from a corporate role and start my own company and enjoy being in my own company. And though there was fear, I was still willing to sit with that because I knew deep in my heart that I was making the right decision. People in relationships will also talk about moments of clarity that may hit them out of the blue, and they know with certainty whether they want to be in that relationship or end that relationship. And often will say the moment they've seen that, they can't unsee it. So know that all of these processes are happening in the background. We may not always be working through them in a cognitive, analytical way, but that doesn't diminish their value, and see them as process. And so I hope if you're contemplating changes, if you're moving into the place that is right for you, and there's a degree of fear or upheaval with it, know that it isn't free fall. Know that it isn't completely out of control. Know that you can do the work to put in the switchbacks for yourself, both in terms of raw analytical numbers or professional advice, but just as important, understanding what that emotional journey looks like and being prepared to navigate your way through it rather than get caught up in it and let it sway you from making that decision, or pushing it away and ultimately making the journey harder for yourself, because suppressing our emotions is never going to solve them. It is the holding the beach ball underwater. The more you suppress it, the more they're going to find ways to come to the surface, and maybe not always in the way that you want them to. So be prepared for that journey. But you have the ability to slow down that free fall. You have the ability to have more control and influence over that change. And you're never burning the ship. You are taking a more full and grounded self forward, and it will serve you well regardless of your path ahead. If you want to learn more, by all means, you can visit my website, or there's additional information in the links in the show notes below. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you the next time.